Wow, wasn't that amazing hearing those stories? Hi, I'm Lori Lasky. I am a member of the COAC, and I am the chair of our region. And it is my distinct honor at this point to introduce someone that I have the absolute highest respect for. This person is an amazing leader to every single corner of Colorado, including our rural areas. The one and only Attorney General Phil Weiser. Let's give him a hand.
We'll get a very special treat with this next panel, and it fits perfectly with what came before it. It's focused on disrupting the pattern, and I think it's fair to say that Kevin, in telling his authentic story, underscored something that a lot of us know, that when you suffer trauma of some kind, it is not something that you can just suck it up and ignore. One point that Raquel lifted up is how the power of peer connection is often what does help one find a path forward, and that no one can walk that alone. This work is meaningful, important, and I've learned a lot about it through some of the people on this next panel. I'd like to have Dr. Leslie Brooks come up here. There's so much to say about Dr. Brooks and her leadership. We're so fortunate to have her here in Colorado. What I'll say is it's wonderful that this conference has found its home here in Larimer County, because Dr. Brooks was at the cutting edge of recognizing Larimer County as a national leader on this crisis, and we in Colorado have continued to learn from her and Larimer County. Terrence Gordon is a well-respected member of law enforcement community, most recently chief at Thornton Police Department, is on our Opioid Abatement Council. To give you an idea of his bona fides on this work, he got an innovative grant to help Thornton PD follow people after they've been revived with naloxone, an important area of work that we as a state need to keep working on. And finally, Maria Gonzalez, I hope I get their last name right, Shimp, is that right? All right, thank you, Maria. Many people know that Denver Health has been an extraordinary light for our whole state. Maria now is actually at Boulder Community Health, but she's been at Denver Health building a program known as Restore, Resilience and Equity through Support and Training for Organizational Renewal. Very much on point. I have stated this point about the impact of trauma and how it impacts people, and that we as a society have important work to do to better understand and enable people to work through trauma in a productive way, and that failure to acknowledge it, and obviously many people like Kevin growing up with it, it can be something that's a lot. Chief Gordon, I want to start with you, and I want to start with you on a point that is an ambition that we in Colorado can advance. We've got some members of our law enforcement community here that it's really great to have this be a team effort. In a lot of circles, veterans, law enforcement, and there's a great book I'd recommend, probably most people here have read it, called The Body Keeps the Score. People are told to ignore trauma. People are told to pretend it doesn't exist. But all forms of trauma, from addiction to child abuse, to sexual abuse, to domestic violence, it doesn't just go away. And this is important. When you witness it, which law enforcement often does, it has an impact on you. Can you talk about this topic and how we better raise awareness of trauma's impact on us and better support people?
I can. As 30 years in policing, come from a family, my mom was one of 7 siblings. It's not about me, I will get to your question, but it just shows that lived experience and trauma and being, I won't say victim, but being affected by things, it comes in many forms. And people see me as a retired police chief, but I'm also a survivor. And everybody in every profession has a story. And particularly we at our level, in order for us to work better together, we've got to understand that. We've got to understand that we're also working with people and not just professions. Trauma in law enforcement, trauma in neighborhoods, community trauma, it's all the same thing. We're not responding to experiments or things in microcosms. We're a part of the community, and we're all seeing the same thing. The difference when it comes to policing is that we see it all the time, every single day, and we don't process it properly. And that also has an impact then on the next response. Now, don't get me wrong, agencies are doing a much better job now than we did in the past. There's some stellar, courageous work that's going on, but it's still siloed. And in order for us to all appreciate this so that we can start working on it, let's look at some other systems that work. In engineering, there are national standards. There are international standards. There are certifications. In education, although we have different school districts, the states, supposedly, the states control that curriculum, control that standards. We have systems. But when it comes to rebuilding human beings, it's always luck of the draw. It's not we don't need more laws. We got enough laws, okay? What we need is system coordination, and that goes with trauma as well. I don't know if I got to your.
No, it's a great point. And let me mention something which I know you've worked on, and I know 2 sheriffs I can see right here, Jamie Fitzsimons, Tyler Brown, 2 great leaders. Bystander awareness in law enforcement is a part of what we're talking about. And it's an important peer connection. When you're in law enforcement and you see a fellow officer who just came from a child abuse situation, you need to be able to say, I think you need to sit this next one out because you're traumatized. And when people are traumatized, they're not thinking clearly. And having that peer support, that bystandership can make a difference in many contexts. Obviously, we're talking here about law enforcement. Dr. Brooks, you have spent your career looking at these issues, and you know and have thought about and taught about what it means to provide trauma-informed care. For those of us here who are still learning about the concept, can you share some of the depth behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Trauma occurs on a variety of levels, right? We just talked about that. And I just also want to point out that our peers, nothing about us, without us, just demonstrated what our systems do, what our systems that desperately need improvement do to people. And so I want to say thank you for your courage, thank you for your bravery in showing up to show us what the impact of our systems and how they deliver and serve up trauma in so many ways. And so I'll talk about some of the structural ways that our systems deliver trauma to the folks that we have every good intention to serve, right, Raquel? Every good intention to serve, and yet we live in systems that don't recognize, that don't see the challenges that it creates. One of my favorite quotes is English French philosopher, but lots of people have recreated. But it's the eyes can't see what the mind is unprepared to know. The eyes can't see what the mind is unprepared to know. And I'm so grateful that we started with that first panel to show us what this looks like, because the trauma that I want to talk about is very structural. We live in systems that are well-meaning, but I will offer a couple of examples. The DSM-5 is the Bible in behavioral health care, and it dictates in a very medical healthcare model the diagnoses for both mental illness, substance use, intellectual and developmental delay, and a variety of other behavioral related conditions. They exist in the same book, and yet we regulate, we bill for, we reimburse for those diagnoses very differently, very differently. We don't have what we often refer to as parity. We regulate substance use disorder very differently and separately from mental illness, and it is baked in to the way that our systems work. For example, there's a book written by a guy named Clint Smith, and this is his theory, but it's not rocket science. It is policy that determines the material conditions of people's lives. And I mean big P policy and little p policy, both at the state and federal and county level, as well as the policies in your employee handbook. And I will point out that our rules and regulations dictate the spaces within which we can deliver treatment for you, and that's really important. That's safety. But the space that is dictated for someone to recover from a mental illness crisis is 100 square feet, and it's got 4 walls. The space that is dictated for someone to recover from their substance withdrawal can be done in a recliner. And I'm not here saying that one can't be done in one space or the other, but they are different. What happens when you are given a 4 walls and a bed is different than what happens in a recliner. And we should all ask ourselves, why? Why is there that difference? Why did we codify it that way? So I'll stop there, AG, with just one of those examples.
So Maria, I know you've thought a lot about this in different contexts. I'd love your reflections on the topic, but also introduce this idea of the intergenerational dynamic, the family dynamic. I think Kevin teed this up very well. Obviously, a community dynamic. For people who are growing up with a lot of trauma around them, this has a whole other character that clearly has an impact.
Yes, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here, and especially to be here on the other side of that incredible panel. I learned so much from the experience of hearing you speak. But trauma, when we think about definitions in a shared language, the work related to trauma began in the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration in the 1990s. And then in 2005, they established a National Center for Trauma-Informed Care. In 2014, SAMHSA then published a foundational body of work that really identified and codified what trauma is. And it was the 3 E's that referenced what a trauma could be. An experience, an event, an experience, and then the effect on an individual or on a community, or as I'll get to, on a whole list of generations. And so the event is the actual threat of physical or psychological harm. And then our experience of it actually is one determination of whether or not we experience a traumatic response. And so how an individual experiences an event or series of events or set of circumstances, whether it's within a system or within a community, is determined by so many things, and that includes our culture. It includes where we are in our development. It includes our social connections and our social supports, and that might determine its effect on us. And so when there is a lasting adverse effect on our physical, emotional, psychological well-being, we may have a trauma response. And that lasting effect may be known and obvious and immediate, or it may be something that shows up much later, and maybe something that shows up in ways we didn't expect. Could be our cognition, how we're thinking, our memory. It could be our interpersonal relationships and our ability to emotionally regulate. But it is true that trauma doesn't just exist on the individual level, but there is collective trauma. And collective trauma is a shared psychological and emotional experience that's experienced by an entire community or group of people. And that can be the result of a devastating event like war or genocide, and it could also be a set of circumstances like living in marginalization, experiencing racism on a daily basis. And what we know, getting to the meat of the question, is that trauma is shared across generations, and it is inherited, and we call it transgenerational or intergenerational trauma, and it's transmitted from people who have had the direct experience of trauma to those in subsequent generations who may have had no direct experience of the circumstance or the set of circumstances. And so this happens because of psychology, because sometimes our experience of trauma impacts how we can care for our children, and impacts the quality and stability of our relationships, impacts our ability to stay emotionally regulated. It occurs because there are sociological changes, structure changes to our communities as a result of the traumatic experiences, and we are learning more and more and more about epigenetics, and it affects subsequent generations because the ways that our genes are expressed can be altered as a result of trauma. And so it becomes embedded and persistent in our genes. And when we think about especially racial trauma, there is a cumulative effect across generations that I think our systems reinforce, as you were referencing, on a very regular basis. And we can either interrupt, become aware and interrupt them, or we can be part of the problem and continue to allow that cumulative nature to impact what is happening in our communities and what is happening as it relates to behavioral health and substance use disorders that are so often the result.
So Mariana, bring this down to one community in Colorado, and we're all affected by this. Jefferson County, I was with a conversation with students in Arvada West last week, very powerful. In Jefferson County, across one generation, you've gone from Columbine to Evergreen. And students are today in a different emotional state as our parents than was the case 26 years ago, pre-Columbine. And I want to pick up Leslie's point about getting across silos, because one of the important efforts we're doing and we're working in another part of our office on how we improve law enforcement training. And Chief Gordon has been a critical leader on this. And one of the ideas for law enforcement is to bring more emotional awareness and emotional intelligence, both about yourself, but also the people that you're with. And Chief Gordon and I have celebrated some school resource officers who show up with students understanding their collective fears about school safety, who show up to understand that they may have a trauma at home. And there's a program that Aaron Miltenberger can tell you about from the San Luis Valley called Think Handle with Care, where the law enforcement communication with the schools is very connected. So if there's a traumatic event at home, they'll tell some of the leaders at school so they know that a student is struggling with some trauma. And the important point here is how we respond with empathy and awareness, not with a punitive mindset, but instead start by saying, hey, is something going on here when someone's acting out? And this is a whole effort that I'm proud of us leading in Colorado. It relates to the work that we talked about earlier about co-responders. Can you talk about how we're looking to build awareness and skills in law enforcement that will be trauma-informed?
I think when you and I first met, and I was on a panel discussion shortly after that, and I said I could shoot the eye out of a housefly from about 20 yards away, and I've never shot a person in the line of duty. I'm not trying to get graphic here, but we don't just encounter violence in policing. And I policed in a big city before I got to Thornton, a very violent place. What we deal with are human beings. We get there and there's a snapshot in time, and the police officer is there to manage the problem until someone else gets there. The problem is, these days, someone else isn't coming soon enough. So police department's mission has expanded in scope. So we use community policing to fix things like that. And what the Attorney General just talked about, that's the essence of community policing. Interacting with human beings. It's not the events. It's not handing out a teddy bear. It's not giving a little kid some candy. All of that stuff is good, but those are inroads to communication. And so police training needs to reflect the fact that, yeah, tactical is important. That keeps you alive. You can never get away from the tactical aspect, especially in a nation with about 1 billion guns, you know. So you can never get away from that. But we can become better and better and better as social science becomes smarter and smarter and smarter. So it's important to make those connections and to understand those connections, but we have to remember, we have to help experienced officers remember, we come on the job as humans. In about 4 years, we're just the biggest butthole you can ever imagine. After about 7 years, when life has kicked you in the bottom and humbled you a few times, you become that person that went to the academy again, you know? So we've got to stop that cycle so that officers remember, hey, you're still a human. Most people out there want more of what you do. They just don't want their kid stopped 4 times in his own neighborhood coming home from school just because he's wearing a black hoodie, you know? So it's those human connections, which people come into service. When I came on in the 90s, it was kick ass, take names, drive fast, because they give you cars with big engines. These kids now are coming on because they want to serve. And it's incumbent upon the rest of us, the rest of the community, to realize that, to capitalize that on things like that, and to invest in the humanizing of police training. It cannot just be tactics. It cannot just be law enforcement, because that's about 10% of what we do. The rest of it is managing problems in communities and partnering with the rest of the systems there that can hopefully come along and solve those root causes.
Before you jump in, Dr. Bruce, I just want to give you props again. The communication, shared language, and collaboration in Larimer County across all these different sectors. People in emergency rooms, providing outpatient care, the criminal justice system. You have set a standard. Feel free to talk about whatever you react to and add that to your list.
Well, I just want to double down on what my partner has so well articulated here, and just really, again, highlighting some of the first panel's conversation around partnership. It is so important. If you had told me when I graduated from medical school that as a physician, I would have a relationship with law enforcement, I would have been so confused, just so terribly confused around what that looked like, what that meant. But I cannot tell you how important our partnership with law enforcement is in the work that we do. And I will also just lay bare, our missions and our values aren't 100% aligned, and they're not supposed to be. They're just not supposed to be. Our job is to work through it. Our job is to figure out where the points of alignment are and drive 10 toes down on that. And we have done that here. It is not without its bumps in the road, heaven knows, but I believe that we have set a standard around what it means to hold space and to work through hard conversations to get to the end of the road. And that includes our emergency departments. Again, emergency department care and community-based care, not 100% aligned, and it's not supposed to be. Our job, again, 10 toes down to figure out where the points of alignment are so that we can get the work done so that people stop dying.
Leslie, I mentioned this collaboration. I believe it's Stacy Schaefer who is one of your key partners. Just take us one step into that. You didn't expect this out of medical school. Now she and you are joined at the hip, aligned. How did that partnership come to be?
Oh man, it was. I mean, just like anything, a lot of serendipity to put folks in the right room, to allow champions to find one another, and to sort of organically create what happens, and let that happen. And so we had a community, lots of community meetings. Northern Colorado Opioid Response Network, Tinoco Cares, and invited everyone to the table and said, if you want our mantra was, if you're listening for the sounds of people coming to save us, stop, because they're not coming. The solution to this challenge is here. It is in this room. And so we invited everyone to the table, and the folks who showed up were law enforcement, providers, community networks, our peers, our opioid treatment programs, and we said, what does this work need to look like? And we found a champion in Lieutenant Schaefer, who said, I want care to be different in the jail, and recognizing that some of it was the jail's job to do, but some of it she needed partnership for. And so we worked together to find braided funding. We worked together to educate and I want to point out here, we educated not just our law enforcement officers, but us, or our deputies in the jail, but us too. Because we were sitting around going, well, what's so blessed difficult about moving 7 people to the treatment room? Like, what? Just go get them from their cell and move them, give them all Suboxone, easy peasy, one and done. And we learned a ton about what movement in a carceral setting meant, and we needed to temper our tone and to understand what that looked like, how we could bring treatment into that setting and do so responsibly.
Maria, I mentioned before you created this program known as Restore, and one of the elements, and we don't do this enough, was providing care for the caregivers. And one thing we've worked on in our office has been around law enforcement and having mental health care available widely and appropriately. First responders do see a lot of trauma, but also those who are serving those with addiction. We need to provide care for the caregivers. Can you talk about the importance of that and the work you've done?
We've heard others this morning talk about peer support, and that recovery and care can't just and sometimes will not happen within treatment, but will happen within community context. And there was a fantastic study that was published by Johns Hopkins, who developed Caring for the Caregiver program, that really highlighted that for those in high exposure professions, law enforcement, medicine, military, when people were struggling emotionally, they did not want to be supported by a clinician, a social worker, even clergy in many cases, which was a surprise to the director of chaplaincy at Johns Hopkins, who thought for sure it would be him. But it was a peer. It was a peer who understood the nature of their work, the nature of their struggle, what they were witnessing, exposed to every day. It was a peer, they wanted to support them. And so we know that peer support has existed within law enforcement for so long. And I was working in inpatient behavioral health, 20 plus years inpatient, outpatient, as a music psychotherapist, specifically a clinician, and knew that we were applying a trauma-informed care lens to support the physical, emotional, and psychological safety of those we were serving. I also knew that the high exposure to stress and trauma that caregivers were experiencing meant that they needed support to stay well regulated in order to provide their best care, in order to do the connecting, in order to build the rapport and the trust. And that wasn't happening with sustained cortisol and nervous system activation across time, which was doing damage to emotional, physical, and psychological health. And so,
So a lot of people call that burnout is one,
Yes.
right? Because we hear
Yep.
that for nurses, for law enforcement, for counselors. This work, if you are not careful, will burn you out.
yes, we hear it and it happens. The 3 criteria for burnout being emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, so detachment. We talk about dignity, humanity, connection. It's not possible when that criteria of burnout is being exemplified. And then the third one is reduced sense of meaning or efficacy in work.
So the need is, this is very consistent with what the co-panelist is saying is, and I think Terrence said this before, give people that sense of meaning. Why'd you get into this? Remind people their why. Keep people connected, particularly with peers. And your first point was depersonalization. What was it?
Depersonalization, the non-clinical use of that term, which is detachment, just a detachment from humanity in order to
stop
keep doing the
forgetting
work.
you're dealing with humans.
Yeah, very common in medicine. Just like the tactical component of policing needs to stay sharp, your skills in medicine need to stay sharp. But when we're relying just on skills training and application of our skills to keep people alive, we divorce ourselves from actual connection, our patients don't do better, and they actually don't stay alive. So as a result, in inpatient behavioral health, I initially started a peer support program to support staff who are impacted by workplace violence, so who are experiencing assault in the workplace, and expanded very quickly, exponentially. Went to an org-wide peer support program at Denver Health, and then to support all kinds of distress, not just those associated with workplace violence, but stressors that are so common in medicine and that actually keep us from being well as the caregivers, which then translates into poor health of our community members, our patients, our colleagues, and certainly our families and communities.
You can jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of double down on that as well. You know, our patients don't get better, but if we don't recognize the suffering that is happening among our workforce, we will pay the price for that. And recognizing, you know, just like I think similar to law enforcement, medicine is a place where you needed to have a lot of swagger. Right, nobody, you can't be wrong at 7 o'clock in the morning during rounds. I'll never forget as a senior resident, I had a first-year resident who called in sick, and I was like, "What is happening here? Who is sick? You don't get sick." And so those broad shoulders are really the culture of medicine that I grew up in, and we know that is lethal. We know that is lethal.
One more point in law enforcement, and a challenge that has been true in a lot of communities in Colorado right now. When law enforcement's understaffed and law enforcement officers are only responding to the most traumatic situations, there's no time to show up for the cat in the tree, or the person who was scammed, or the person whose car was stolen. That means law enforcement is constantly showing up at child abuse, or sexual assault, or rape, or murder. That's really hard not to have that time for that connective activities and something to be paid close attention to. Are there questions from the audience before I get to my final question for the panel? Anyone from the audience want to jump in? We got a very smart audience here. Not afraid to call on people either. All right, Tyler Brown, you're the head of the Colorado Sheriff's Association. We've had a lot of conversation about law enforcement. We'd love to get your question or thought. Jamie's going to bring you the mic.
So there's been a lot of conversation about changing just the verbiage of the things that we use, and listening to the doctor and the chief up here, we really tried to push hard inside the Arapahoe County Jail to stop referring to individuals that we're incarcerating as inmates. It takes away from that, it dehumanizes them. And that's that position that we're in. And we've moved to calling them patients because they are patients. Everybody that comes through our doors, the 18,000 people that we book in every year to hold them accountable for something inside of CRS, doesn't mean that we can't do it without compassion. And we have to make sure that we are changing the narrative. And I've brought this up nationally, and it fell on deaf ears a couple weeks ago, but I'm going to keep coming back, and that's the reason that I'm in this room, and it's the reason that Jamie and I continue to collaborate on how do we address this issue from the eastern plains of Colorado to the mountain towns of Colorado to southern Texas to Florida. It's making sure that people hear this message over and over again, that we are dealing with human beings and their patients, and we need to make sure that their care is met wherever they're at. And so that's something that I wanted to add. So thank you so much for your guys' continued work, and thank you for everybody in this room. I think that that's something that we can work on together. So thank you.
There's a lovely Tanya Wheeler here.
Thanks, Jamie. Stop it. So I want to go back and ask, first of all, thank you for all of you and the amazing information that you've provided. I want to bring up the point about peers getting peer support. So you guys talked about the importance of people working clinically in these environments and law enforcement who need peer support. But one of my greatest passions is how are peers getting their support? Because often what I have seen and truly what I experienced early in my own career is, oh, I don't have to have my own self-care plan because I'm working with these people, and especially in substance use disorder, where people are told part of your recovery is giving that away to other folks. And I think that gets a little bit confusing. So I want to make sure that we are truly talking about the peers who need peer support. And just, you know, how do we do that? How do we continue to help people get better? Because if this job gets us anything, it'll get us loaded. And it will destroy our mental health. So we got to do it outside of our job.
Thank you so much for that, that question, and also a really powerful statement about, I think there's a talk coming up next on secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma. And in the model that I am so committed to, it includes very, very robust holding, support, witnessing, and care for those who are doing the holding, support, witnessing, and care of others. And there has to be someone who's in that place to help support the peer supporters, because it can be considered an additional burden when really, I heard a reference to the gift of story that we are given in the work that so many of you are doing. And it is a gift to receive someone else's story, and it can also land very, very heavy on the heart, and it should. And because it should, we need to care for one another very intentionally and with a lot of tenderness. And I will say, you know, it's been reinforced already here. So many times we heal in relationship. It is all about connection. So we cannot step up and step into this work without being in deep connection to one another in order to be well ourselves. Because the world needs us. The world needs you and all the work you're doing.
And I'll just double down on that. I don't think. And thank you for your question, Tanya. It's an important one. I don't think the employee handbook has yet been written that adequately describes the support and approach that these team members, and really, quite frankly, other team members need to do their job. right? Yes, that we need it. Everybody in this room, from our peers, but uniquely our peers as well. But really, everyone. I mean, there's not an employee handbook out there that doesn't, sort of, assume positive intent and dress codes and close to moral clauses, et cetera, et cetera. But we need to focus on this. We need to codify in our policy, in our little p policies, what it means to have a workforce whose part of whose job is to share their lived experience and to be exposed over and over again. How do we adequately support? I think there are lots of organizations out there who went 10 toes down on hiring peers and yet didn't have an appropriate and adequate structure within which to support them. And so we need to learn from those mistakes and get better at that.
And also a shout out for the Recovery Friendly Workplace Initiative. We'll have some awards later. Our office, Attorney General Weiser, has taken leadership that we are getting trained. Recovery Friendly Leaders is here in order to help us with that training. We're going to be giving awards to communities that have stepped up, workplaces. And then also, as you know, the funding opportunities have highlighted one area, which is peer support. So in this next round of funding, there will be a round of funds dedicated for peers.
I greatly appreciate the topic being headline here today in the conference. This is one of the things to keep in mind, is that this opioid crisis is really part of an addiction crisis. And it's really critical, I think, for us to take a look at what we can do with this unprecedented amount of money we're going to have until 2041. And I have a question for you all. I have a challenge for those of you that are part of the COAC and the ROACs, is what can we do to really be thoughtful enough to take that theme, disrupting the pattern, and incorporate it into the funds that we're letting out the door? Because it's one thing to intervene with, and we have to, with the folks who are immediately in addiction, but what about this next generation over the next 15 years? And what can we do to offset that? When you look at the data in terms of folks who enter treatment, generally there's about a 9-year history of time of when that problem began until they get in. We have 9 years to intervene. So my question to the panel, and I apologize, I had to step out for a minute, so if you'd address this, I apologize. But the challenge, and maybe the question to you all, including Attorney General Weiser, is how do you see that perhaps this theme can get integrated into the use of the opioid settlement funds? Any reflections on that? And I think that's going to take a deeper discussion among the groups. I'm going to challenge you all to have that discussion, but I'm curious to hear some of your initial reflections.
Well, first, Jose, for those who don't know Jose Escobar, the consortium, thank you for all your leadership. And it's a perfect note to end on. If you could take one lesson from this topic that we're talking about and use it to challenge us to improve whatever systems or system that we're looking at, what would it be? Go for it.
I'll go first. And I have a tendency to rant. And some of you can tell that when I'm doing things like this, I'm always controlled because I'm 57 years old. Vulnerability is power. 57 years old. I've been a victim of sexual abuse. My stepdad was addicted to crack back in the good old days when that was the big drug out there. I've saw things as a kid that you shouldn't have to see. And I'm also a social scientist. I'm the first person in my family to get a PhD, to get a bachelor's degree. But there's a but there. Getting smarter and smarter and smarter, and the problems are getting worse and worse and worse. So what we're good at is the empathy. We've got that in spades. What we're good at is the analysis. We've got the science. We know what works. What we don't have is the direction. And it's not that our legislatures are not filled with good people. The incentive structure is all wrong. They're not elected to solve problems. They are elected to do things. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as they do something. So it's the direction that we have to work on. If 3 words to take away: Empathy. People are out there doing great work. Analysis. But the direction is the piece of that pie that's missing. It's got to be coordinated. It's got to be integrated. And it's got to be led. We don't need more laws. We don't need more money. Nonprofits, bear with me here. We don't need more laws. We don't need more money. Okay? The people are already at work. We're already here. But we run into roadblocks called policy that stop us from doing what we can do together to rebuild human beings. Imagine, I'm done, I'm done. Everybody in here is a caring person. Some of us, if we equate this to music, some of us are virtuosos at what we do. We're virtuosos at what we do. But everybody's playing a different song right now. And if we play that out loud together, it just sounds like noise. Imagine if we had a conductor leading the state who could give those musicians all the same sheet of music. What would that sound like?
I'll go next because I'm gonna take a page out of Chief Gordon's playbook and I'm gonna double down on that. Policy is where stigma lives, and policy is where we can disrupt it and dismantle it. I will just exhort us all to ask why. Why do we do it that way? Why? Who is benefited by doing it that way? But most importantly, who is compromised by doing it that way? We have to ask ourselves why. Why do we do criminal justice screening for folks with a substance use disorder? But if you present for your depression care, if you present for your bipolar disorder care, no one's going to ask you about your criminal justice background, whether you have convictions in another state. Why do we do it that way? Thank you so much.
And the quintessential question for trauma-informed care is shifting the question we ask from what's wrong with you to what is happening for you. And when we think about puzzling behavior, strange choices, concerning paths that those we love, care for, are on, we just need to ask, what's happening for you right now? What's underneath this, and what support do you need? And there is empathy in the room. There are compassionate hearts here. And when I think about, is it recovery-friendly workplaces? Yeah. We are living amongst one another in times of struggle. And each of us in this room carries heartbreak, carries despair, carries struggle. And there are identities that are seen, and there are identities that are unseen. And so my call to action would be continue to check in on one another. Vow to continue to connect deeply and openly with this question that you're thinking all the time in the back of your mind. What's happening for you right now, and how can I come alongside you in it? This is very powerful space. Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Can we thank our remarkable panel for a great conversation?